What's going on, everyone? This is the latest edition of Pro Wrestling Then and Now, live on the pwtorch YouTube page and available for download afterwards on the pwtorch VIP network. And of course, you could watch this video anytime on YouTube on demand, whichever way you are consuming this show. I thank you for your support. I am your host, Torch contributor Frank Peteani, and today we are jumping back 40 years. That's 40, folks. To episodes 3 and 4 of Saturday night's main event. We're in an era where Saturday night has returned to the current product, so I figured it'd be appropriate to go back and review some of the old shows. And of course, I can't do it alone. I have a co-host with me. He has been on the show a number of times. I was on his show recently that I'll let him talk about here momentarily. Longtime Torch contributor and your friend of mine, Mr. Brandon LeClair. Brandon, how are you this evening, my friend?
Well, a little inside baseball aside from our technical issues getting this off the ground. I'm doing fine.
Yes, I have to give a public shout to Brandon because he bailed me out on the whole login process. I was having issues, probably because of my location. I am not in the U.S., so I think the StreamYard login gets a little spooked with that because it's complicated to explain. And I was texting with Wade, and it just here we are though. Brandon
we made it.
He saved the day. So we are here live on the YouTube page. Of course, Brandon will be the one bringing up the chats as I am. I'm the host of the show, but he is technically the host. So if anybody is live, he will be the one to put the chats on the screen.
I'm in control of all the buttons, even though it doesn't look like I am.
He's got the buttons. To use my day job, he's flying the plane. I am the I guess the monitor, the pilot monitoring, or the host monitoring, we'll call it, because that's the pilot that doesn't fly in my job is the pilot monitoring. So that's where we are today. I'm just going to get a couple of housekeeping items out of the way, Brandon, real quick. Of course, like and subscribe to the pwtorch YouTube page and like this video. Of course, if you are not a VIP member, it's pwtorch.com/govip. All the great content you get, including this show as an audio download, The Fix, everything with Rich Fan, all the VIP shows, including yours, Brandon, without commercials. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. And thank you for bringing that up because you got all the buttons as we talked about. It's been a little bit since I've been on. Usually I try to do a couple of episodes a month, but scheduling was just a little tight. So I'm just doing the one here in February. In January, I covered the 1990 and 1995 Royal Rumbles with Sean Radican and John Mazzara, respectively. So I hope you had a chance to check those out. March, I'm going to devote to WCW as we continue to study the pre-Monday Night War era. I know it's a year that everybody laments about, but I want to study it, and I want to see what didn't work, what did work. Maybe it wasn't as bad as we thought. So it'll be Super Brawl 5 and Uncensored, both from WCW. I'll announce the details and the co-hosts when everything gets firmed up. Everything is just kind of in the air right now. Brandon, today we're talking Saturday night's main event, episodes 3 and 4. I covered 1 and 2 back in December with longtime Torch VIP member David Wolf. So I'm looking forward to getting your take on that. But before we do that, I've got about 10, 15 minutes carved out for current events, as we talked about off air. And I want to give you a chance to weigh in on the current situation with The Rock and Cody Rhodes as we get ready for this Saturday's Elimination Chamber. Of course, you're going to be covering that on Wrestling Night in America. So hope everybody gets a chance to listen to that show. Yeah, Brandon, just lay it on me. You know, what we saw on SmackDown, what we saw on Raw this week, and, you know, what's percolating in your head about Mr. Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of look at on the show, you know, it's in the title, Pro Wrestling Then and Now. You kind of want to, in some ways, relate what we're talking about in the current day to what we watched for this particular episode. And I can't draw many parallels directly between what we're seeing with The Rock and Cody Rhodes to 1985, 1986 WWF, but I can certainly draw some parallels in what we're seeing with The Rock and Cody Rhodes to what we saw during the height of the Attitude Era with Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon. And
Yes.
of course, the Rock is sort of in that Vince McMahon role. At least he was for this particular promo. I have to imagine that Paul Levesque and the WWE creative team just kind of throw their hands in the air every time Dwayne Johnson shows up, because they have, over the course of the last 18 to 24 months, really gotten into the groove of running a really tight ship creatively. I mean, you can certainly point to some bad angles, some areas where they've run awry a bit here and there, but by and large, I think this has been the most creatively fulfilling and the most creatively complete product that WWE has put on screen in many, many years. And so when you get someone like Dwayne Johnson, who clearly has his own ideas and his own motivations, it can muddy the waters a little bit. He did it last year, and they certainly were able to, make chicken salad out of a pretty rough situation. And perhaps they'll be able to do it again. But I saw someone, I think it was on Blue Sky, mention that The Rock may have turned more times in that promo than Big Show did his entire career. And I mean, I think that is a little hyperbolic, but it's not. It's not like so far out of left field.
Yeah. There's a point to what he's saying, or he or she. There's a point.
Yeah, it was jarring, and I think that he is in this position where he sort of wants to represent three different people all at once. I think Dwayne Johnson, the man, wants the love, respect, and admiration of the crowd.
Yeah.
The Rock, the character, just wants a big reaction either way. And then The Rock, the final boss, the overarching figure, member of the board, TKO employee, wants to be booed because that's the character that person is playing.
Right.
But they're all at odds with each other.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, what do you make of it? Where do you fall in this?
My hands are up in the air. If this is not leading to a match, then what's the point? Because here's my problem with it. We're not Boo Rock. We're not in an era where the corporate champion is really a thing that people want to see, or at least I don't think it's a thing that people want to see. And The Rock was, for a brief period of time, that corporate champion. Ironically, I covered Survivor Series 98, where he became that corporate champion. Mm-hmm. So, maybe there's some reliving of that. I don't know. I don't think so, because there's two completely different stories, but I don't think anybody is looking for that. I think, to your point, and it speaks volumes, is that we are creatively fulfilled now. We're watching a logical product. All right, is it great every week? No, but at least you're rewarded for watching, and at least you before this whole Majumugats, as we say, before this whole thing came down on Friday night, you were like, okay, maybe it's going to be Cena, maybe it's going to be Punk, maybe it's going to be this, but you don't mind having that conversation, and you're kind of intrigued by what's going to come out of the Elimination Chamber. This just throws us back to an era where, it worked for that time period. You know, to give a shout to my friend Justin, we talk about this a lot. Certain things work for certain times, you know, and the corporate champion, you know, that whole angle worked when The Rock was active in the late 90s. We're not there anymore, you know? And it's funny, I could almost tie today's wrestling to what we are going to review today because, as you know, I know there's a lot of bad comedy on those Saturday Night's Main Event episodes, and we'll sure talk about it, but at least there was logic from show to show. You watched episode 3, things were set up on episode 4, you watched episode 5, and you know what? It was fine. It was pretty fulfilling. You were rewarded for watching those shows. I even feel rewarded for watching episodes 1 and 2 because things were tied in. So, you know, I can make that parallel. So if he's not going to be in a match, then Dwayne, what is the point? Are you going to be in Cody's opponent's corner? Is that where this is going? Is the long play a match between the two of you at SummerSlam? I don't know. I'm all over the place, quite frankly.
I also feel like, you know, WWE spent a lot of time post-Attitude Era trying to recapture the magic of the corporation versus the anti-hero babyface.
The heel promotion versus the people.
And
so many times.
Exactly. And for the first time, really, since the Attitude Era, the promotion is not the heel anymore.
Right.
The promotion, since ditching Vince, has largely become a babyface entity. And, you know, there are certainly people who, you know, myself included, who have plenty of issues with Paul Levesque because of what he may or may not know about everything that went on behind the scenes with Vince McMahon and Janelle Grant. But regardless, on television, the way that things are booked, the way that Paul Levesque presents himself in front of the camera to the media, for all intents and purposes, for the first time in many, many years, the company is a babyface, and that lines up, you know, between public perception and kayfabe.
Right.
And so I think knowing that, you're going to have a hard time selling this multifaceted situation where you know that you can't make good on it in the ring, because the struggle is going to be Dwayne Johnson as the public heel figurehead of TKO, who is getting in the way of the creative vision of Paul Levesque, through which Cody Rhodes, I guess, is the representation. But you can't do The Rock versus Triple H. We're not going down that road.
No.
So Cody is the stand-in, and I just don't know, you know, if you're not going to that well now, how long do you eke that out? How much is The Rock around in the next year to make that pertinent? Do you have someone else representing The Rock on TV every week? Do you have a new general manager who is espousing The Rock's interests? Otherwise, it's going to be like, all right, well, Cody is the world champion, and we treat him fairly and we book him fairly 11 months out of the year. But come WrestleMania time, The Rock shows up and gets in his business.
Yeah.
I just don't know how you can necessarily pull that off in a satisfying way.
I agree.
I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that they're running a year behind on plans, largely because The Rock pulled out of WrestleMania 39 in Hollywood. I mean, we all know they wanted to do The Rock and Roman Reigns in Hollywood. It didn't work out, so it got pushed to the following year. And when the crowd universally rejected that notion, they had to pivot, go with Cody and Roman, which kind of made the most sense. And now we're in this situation where The Rock and Roman is still on the table. That's still an intriguing matchup, but so is The Rock and Cody. And yet we're not getting either of those things this year.
Nope.
The Rock is not, unless something has changed, it appears as though The Rock is not going to wrestle this year.
Right. And then next year comes WrestleMania. There's going to be another thing that comes up next year, and then we're not going to get – and it's just like on and on and on and on. So and the thing is too, like, let's just say he represents somebody, right? Because if he's not representing Cody and Cody's not going to be his corporate champion, well, then what's the point of this if he's not going to represent somebody against Cody?
Right.
Who is that person? Roman? It's not going to be Roman. Jacob Fatu? Maybe. But I don't know. It's just like I don't see the scenario where I'm like, okay, I want to see this. Okay. I want to see The Rock, manage this. I mean, I know, Jacob, just as an example, is somebody that, they think pretty highly of, and maybe that could work in the long run, but I just don't know that person's out there. And that's kind of, if that's not happening because The Rock is not going to wrestle, then what's the point?
Yeah. And I think that we're looking at a situation now where, regardless of what direction they go here, they have added another wrinkle to the WrestleMania main event that they can't really pay off.
Right.
Because Cody is going to face CM Punk, John Cena, both. I mean, that one of those three scenarios seems like the most likely. Either Punk one-on-one, Cena one-on-one, or a triple threat. And how does The Rock work into any of those scenarios?
See the referees, what are you doing?
And how do you? I mean, there are some notions in the chat. Cena and The Rock teaming up, the Hollywood connection, but Cena's only around until December, and he's going to be part-time too. That's hard to sell. I can't imagine that John Cena is finally going to make that heel turn in his final months with the company.
I don't see that at all.
And I mean, if you want to tell a story with CM Punk, I mean, Punk has been the most openly critical of The Rock and the way that he has treated the business. And so that's a stretch of a connection, unless you want to just go all in with this notion that Punk has sold out and he's just in it for the money now. He will do anything, to get his WrestleMania main event. I mean, I guess you can do that, but
is that tied to the favor?
But then you've got to tie Heyman into The Rock somehow. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, and I get. Yeah. I mean, I get the idea that. So you have. I don't know about you, but like when I think about Cody versus Cena or Cody versus Punk at WrestleMania, they're both matches that I'm interested in on paper. I think they're both solid main events. Neither of them carry even a modicum of the weight or intrigue that Cody versus Roman did.
Right.
And so,
or what Cody versus Rock would do.
Right. And so do they feel like they need this added element? But then I go back to the idea that, like, this probably wasn't Triple H's idea.
Oh, no.
So with that being said, he's not the one booking this. He's the one booking around it.
Right.
So
and here's just to throw something else, and I'll give a shout to Sean Radican. I was talking to him earlier in the week. You read his take on the torch. What was the point of The Rock coming out after Bad Blood and doing the throat slash and then doing the 41? I don't know if you remember that part. Like,
yep.
right? Yep. Okay. So, like, what are we doing here?
But then he showed up at the Netflix premiere.
Yeah, and everything was
just
fine.
Threw the whole character out the window. I mean, yeah. I did the Wade Keller Pro Wrestling post show with Wade after the Netflix premiere, and we were just like, well, I guess The Rock's done for a while. Like, exactly. I mean, he threw. I mean, it was like the final boss just never existed.
Yeah.
And now it's back.
Right.
He just, he can't seem to make up his mind as to how in this he really is, and
Yeah.
it's gotten them in trouble. I mean, it got them in trouble last year. They made it work, and
Yeah.
now they're gonna have to try to do it again. I mean,
Yeah.
I suspect that Cody turns the Rock down. I mean, is that your assumption?
It has to. Yeah.
Yeah, but then then does it become they're in an all-out feud, or is it The Rock buys somebody else to come for Cody?
Well, it's not going to be Tatanka, as Derek Mitchell suggests. And ironically, I covered that story when Greg Parks and I did SummerSlam '94. I mean, Ted DiBiase, Lex Luger, and Tatanka were not on the level that Cody Rhodes and The Rock are at the moment. So, I mean, I understand the comparison, and I understand Tatanka was out of nowhere, but he was not strong as a babyface. And yes, the angle was shocking, but it ended up, going nowhere afterwards. So, the only other alternate scenario before we move on to the topic at hand is maybe Cody goes along with The Rock, but he's playing The Rock, and then that gets revealed at WrestleMania.
I mean, I'll say this: if they wanted to go all in and turn Cody heel, I think there's a fun story there, where Cody is just The Rock's champion, and he's he just sells his soul. I don't think that's where they're headed.
No,
I think it's probably too early to pull that trigger. But in terms of how you get to intriguing story down the road, I think that sets up a story far better than him just saying no and The Rock choosing
somebody else,
anybody. Yeah. I think the most intriguing scenario is that Cody goes full bore heel. I just don't think that's where they're going.
Right.
And I'm not sure that it should be. Like, I'm not advocating to turn Cody heel right now. I just think that from a pure storytelling perspective, it gives you the most intriguing and the most fun options.
Right. It throws everything up in the air. It throws everything up in the air, because even what they had planned, wasn't super intriguing, but it wasn't bad either. Like, I don't like this. Well, the WrestleMania bill wasn't that great, so this throws a surprise, great element into it. And it's just like, not really. It's just to throw things off for the sake of throwing things off, if you don't have a really good endpoint in mind, really just doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. But,
and I mean, think about how intriguing, for example, or just the promo work that CM Punk could do opposite a Cody Rhodes who just decided to sell out to The Rock. Yeah. And Punk is having no issue getting cheered anywhere in the country. I mean, they don't have to worry about that.
Right.
They would have a hot feud right out of the gate if Punk is your babyface and he's railing against corporate Cody and The Rock. Right. I think that's more interesting than the both of them being babyfaces. But you're losing Cody Rhodes.
You're losing Cody Rhodes as a babyface. But yeah, there is a story there. There is backstory, and we can go on and on about this. But Brandon, I just wanted to give you a chance to weigh in. I don't know if you're going to be on with Wade tomorrow. So while everything was hot, I wanted to give you a shot to talk about it before we move.
Well, I'm sure that there will be plenty of discussion around it in the Elimination Chamber post show, regardless of what the answer is. I have a feeling we'll be talking most about that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's just nothing else on that show that's going to be tremendously conversation worthy. So I'm looking forward to that. All right. Well, now let's go to a time where, let's see. Well, I was 12 and you were not around yet. So
it was negative 5.
Negative 5. Yeah, that's right. You're around my baby cousin's age. He was born in '89. So, you're of that. I guess that's the millennial. Yeah, it's the millennial generation.
Yeah, elder millennial.
Elder millennial. Yeah, yeah. Overall, before we go over the shows in detail, just your overall take. What big picture items before we get specific on the two shows.
Well, I mean, we talked a bit about them over text. I can't say they were good.
Yeah.
um, it was they were fun. They were fun to watch, not because the wrestling was good or because the shows were particularly noteworthy in any way, but simply because it was a really fascinating sort of slice of life from that era of wrestling, and it
Mhm.
was cool to see some of the build for WrestleMania 2 start to take shape. I mean, I haven't spent a ton of time watching uh, a lot of wrestling from before my time, but I've certainly, I've seen all the WrestleManias, I've seen all the
Mhm.
SummerSlams, the major events, and so knowing the beats of where they were headed, it was kind of neat to see that stuff start to take shape in a way, all the while being interspersed with just like over the top comedy drivel. I mean, to an extent that I truly like I wasn't expecting, having not
Mhm.
seen some of these early shows. I just wasn't expecting it to be as prevalent as it was.
Mhm. Mhm. And here's what's sad. I'm watching this and I'm like, this is 1985. This could probably fit in like 2008. Because Vince was doing that stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, you were
yeah.
watching that time period, with the diva searches and
Unfortunately, I was.
all the uh, what do you have, like pie eating contests and all the crap that
Oh
he
yeah.
used to, I mean, it was just, yeah, it was
I
it
mean,
was
think of
bad.
like early era, like when NXT was a competition show, some of the stuff they were doing on that. I mean,
Yeah,
and yeah, the diva searches, just
yeah.
yeah. I mean,
I'm
when
I'm
when
thankful. I'm thankful I don't remember a lot of specifics because I've blocked it out of my head, and I
yeah,
really didn't want to go research.
I mean, like when SmackDown was just like 30 minutes of Hornswoggle. Like,
Oh,
I mean, I always bring it up whenever I do shows with Greg Parks because, of course, he sort of handed the torch to me for SmackDown coverage. That's how I got my start with pwtorch, and
mhm.
I inherited the show during a pretty good time. I mean, shortly after I started covering it, they debuted on Fox, and things were pretty good for a bit
Mm,
there. Uh, but Greg covered it through the doldrums. I mean, 2006, 2007, 2008, when it was just, I mean, garbage is probably being too kind. So, yeah, there was a lot of that. Um,
mhm.
one thing that struck me in watching both of these shows, I was doing sort of the in my head like the 10-year jumps, thinking about how much the product changes over the course of time. So I'm thinking
Mhm.
like 85, 86, you're jumping ahead to 95, 96. And that's a down period for WWF. It's when WCW was really taking off. But the company, I mean, just the look, the feel, the presentation, the wrestlers at the top of the card, it's all drastically different from
Yeah.
85, 86 to 95, 96. And then you do the jump again, 95, 96 to 05, 06, completely different, totally different rosters, presentations, styles, everything. But then you start getting into the more modern product. And I'm thinking, like, all right, let's look at like 15, 16 to 24, 25. There's not much turnover.
No.
Product is similar, looks very similar, style is very similar. It the turnover, the change has slowed down tremendously
Yeah.
in the last decade and a half.
Mhm. Well, look at your elimination chamber. John
Yeah.
Cena, Drew McIntyre. Let's not forget he was around from '09 to 14.
Yep.
Your current champion, Cody Rhodes.
Hmm.
Cody Rhodes was around in 2015. The Miz is still around. Okay.
Yep.
I mean, Dolph Ziggler was hanging on till last year, for Christ's sake. So I mean, yeah, the last 15 to 20 years, there has just not been there hasn't been the turnover, but back in that time period, it was just, I mean, you talk Hogan, Andre. I mean, this was my entry into wrestling. So like all these names, this is my I was actually a few months away from starting. So I started around post episode, I want to say 5 of Saturday Night's Main Event, because that's when they really set up WrestleMania 2.
Yeah.
Okay, that Hogan against Morocco, King Kong Bundy attacks Hogan. They set up the steel cage match. The episode after that was my first. But all the Piper, Ventura on the mic, Andre, Bud, Bundy, Stutt. I mean, this, yeah, and then 10 years later, Diesel, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, Bret Hart. 10 years after that, Cena, Batista. It's just
there's almost no holdovers when you do the 10-year jump until you get to modern time.
Modern times, yeah, and that's contracts, better pay. I mean, we really didn't have competition, right? After WCW went balls up.
Four Eyes Malone in the chat too had mentioned. I mean, like, you got injury prevention significantly better.
Yeah.
There's less rampant drug and alcohol abuse.
Yeah.
Bodies are just lasting longer. Guys are taking better care of themselves. The schedule is far less grinding than it used to be. I mean, now look in the last 3 to 4 years. I mean, WWE used to be primarily a house show business. They don't even run house shows anymore.
Right. And that, now going back to the time period that we're covering, that was the business. The business was the house shows. You didn't have Raw and SmackDown. Okay. You didn't have any of that stuff. You had primetime wrestling. You had all-star wrestling, a little bit later on Wrestling Challenge, Superstars of Wrestling. All you got was squash matches on TV. If you wanted the good matches, you had to go. Basically, the house show every month in your local area, that's your B pay-per-view that you watch, if you think about it, right? So that, and the syndicated shows were all about cutting the promos, setting up the feuds, but you wouldn't see things paid off. Like, you actually got more payoff in these few episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event than you would get later on. Like, the episodes were so scattershot after this first batch, like the episode 4 was in January of 86. Episode 5 was in March. Next one was May. Next one was October. So from May to October, that's 5 months. You're not going to have the continuity that you had on these first few shows. Yeah. And like, the wrestling quality, the quality itself, if we're looking at that in a vacuum, no, it's not that great. But this is what you got. Like, you couldn't wait for Saturday Night Main Event. It's like, oh, I'm getting good wrestling, because all you would see were the jobbers on TV.
Yep.
And I know we've talked about this on air. You started around 97?
98. So my first foray. So let me back up a little bit. My first real foray into wrestling was probably some of the Saturday Night's Main Events in the early 90s, because my grandfather would come over for dinner on the weekends, and he was a diehard, lifelong fan. And so when my parents would be cooking dinner, he'd be in the living room trying to watch wrestling, and I would be aggressively trying to change the channel because I thought it was stupid. But I remember seeing, the Hulk Hogans, the Macho Mans, the colorful characters, but I hated it. It wasn't until, so he passed away in the beginning of 97, and I inherited all of his VHS tapes, and most of them just sat in a tote, or not a tote, but underneath our end table in the living room for well over a year untouched. And it wasn't until I got into wrestling and was too young to be staying up to watch Raw, that I started using those tapes to record Monday Night Raw to watch the next day.
Okay.
So I never went back and watched them. But what I then did start doing was on the weekends, I would go to the local video. There was a local video store one town over that carried every single pay-per-view on VHS. And I would just go every weekend, rent 3 at a time, watch them, return them at the end of the weekend, next weekend, do the same thing.
Yeah.
So I would start, I don't know, I probably started like 90, started with like the 94 pay-per-views probably. And then like the earlier stuff I'd sprinkle in, like the WrestleManias, the SummerSlams and stuff like that. So, I mean, by the time mid 99, 2000 rolled around, I had seen every pay-per-view from probably 94 up to the present. And some I'd seen multiple times. I was a big fan of like the Rumble in 97, for example, because I gravitated towards Shawn Michaels. But yeah, that was my first foray. So I did in fact see, probably some of those early episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event. I just didn't know what I was watching.
Yeah. But the point being, like, your entry was when you were getting the good matches on TV. Like, it was far far more than what we got in 1985, 1986. Like I said, unless you were going to the house shows I don't even think we had cable at this point. So forget about like primetime wrestling or anything like that. And that, like, primetime wrestling after Saturday Night's Main Event, primetime wrestling, once we got cable, they would go around to the house shows and they would show different matches. So it's like, okay, good. Now I'm getting better wrestling than I would get on Saturday. So, this was like in real time, this was like the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now you watch it, you're like, man, that's the fun of doing this show, because you're watching it through today's lens. You're looking
at
house
shows were a huge business everywhere then. I mean, it was because it was still the territory thing. I mean, especially here, I'm privy to it because not a lot of people remember this unless or maybe you do if you just recently watched the Vince McMahon documentary. But like, Maine was Vince's hub. This is where Vince Sr. sent Vince Jr. to get his start. So the first couple of years of his career before he fully took over the WWF, Vince McMahon was primarily booking out of Bangor, about 45 minutes north of me. So, they were running here every month. Yeah. And real quick, Frank, just another a note I had a mention here in the chat. CJ LaChapelle saying WWE fully stopped house shows. They haven't completely killed them off, but they're running primarily like international house shows now when they do the tours. Like, they've got like 2 weeks of TV overseas coming up here on the road to WrestleMania, and they are doing house shows then. But stateside, I mean, they're down to some months there aren't any. I mean, they're largely just a TV company at this point. The way that AEW is. Sorry, Frank. I didn't
one
like
after Christmas at MSG, like they did that this past Christmas. Right. They'll do that kind of stuff, but it's not a house show business. Their business is not built on house shows anymore.
Right. A reminder to people in the chat too, because a lot of you showed up after we started. I am in charge of the controls and the chats, but Frank is the host. So that's why it's a little broken up here, because I'm trying to put up your chats, but I also don't want to step on Frank's toes and have something come up while he's in the middle of talking about something else. So we're running a little counter to how we normally would, and that's why I had to step in there and get
some technical issues, as we mentioned at the outset of the show on my end, getting into the service, but I think that has to do with my location. So at least, hey, we're here and we're making it work. And Brandon, if you see something and you got to interject, don't hesitate. All right, let's dig into it. Episode 3. So this aired on November the 2nd of 1985. It was recorded on Halloween, so it turns out to be a Halloween-themed episode. It's in the Hershey Park Arena in Hershey, Pennsylvania. The arena is still around. It plays host to a hockey club, and at it eventually becomes the arena for the NHL's Washington Capitals farm team. So a little shout to Todd Martin there, big Capitals fan. There were 8,000 in attendance according to Wikipedia, and your announcers, as they would be for some time, Vince McMahon and Jesse the Body Ventura. Get a bunch of intro segments. I'm just going to list them all and give you a chance to weigh in. Mean Gene Okerlund dressed as a pumpkin, and Bobby Heenan dressed as a weasel. Or I think they call him Davy Crockett later on. I don't know. It's 40 years ago. So they're at a pumpkin bobbing tub because they're going to be bobbing for pumpkins. One of 3 Halloween competitions on the night. Then we get Hulk Hogan and Andre talking about their match with King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd. You get Jesse Ventura, ironically dressed as a peacock. So maybe he was foreshadowing what was to come in 36 years. He's talking to Roddy Piper, dressed as Super Roddy, calling back to what happened on the previous Saturday night's main event with Uncle Elmer's wedding. We'll get into that, and sets the stage for Piper's Pit. Gene, a lot of these are pre-taped, so you can tell these are pre-taped. Mean Gene talks to Terry Funk, says he wants Hulk Hogan for the WWF Championship, but is going to go through and house train the Junkyard Dog. And then we get to the opening credits. Vince and Jesse introduce the show, and Vince highlights Roddy Piper's interference at the wedding. So just overall, the opening segments, we don't have to dig into them one by one, but just, what'd you think of how they set up the show? Bad comedy and all.
Yeah, I mean, comedy aside, it's cool to see the way that these shows were presented. And I think it's neat that the Paul Levesque iteration of Saturday Night's Main Event has lifted a similar style, a similar throwback presentation. I mean, they're using the same theme music. They're doing the sort of the rapid fire, like pre-taped interviews where they're talking about, what's to come throughout the night. I would be lying if I said that I didn't spend a decent portion of this trying to figure out what the substance was in the bobbing for pumpkins. Was it supposed to, like, it had like the color of chocolate but the consistency of oil?
I know.
Like, don't you usually just use water for that? Like, what was it?
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. You got to use chocolate, pal. It's going to look a lot better. Probably what Vince was saying. I did like that, like, regardless of what you thought, and I don't know if you got a chance to watch episode 2, but the Uncle Elmer wedding, that was actually a big story, because it was an actual wedding. Like, he actually married that woman. So it was a big story. And I like how they tied it in. They called back to it, and they talk about it later. So yeah. I
thought it was interesting right out of the gate too that these shows were sort of treated as though they existed in a vacuum and there was no other wrestling on. And I know obviously those other shows were squash matches.
Yeah.
But it almost felt like you could sit down and watch these Saturday Night's Main Events in succession and not feel like you missed anything. Like it was almost like watching Raw every week. I mean, and even though they were spaced sometimes a month, 2 months apart, it didn't feel like there was anything else happening in between, which was interesting.
Yeah, like a lot of times you didn't have to, because everybody wasn't seeing the same show. Like, different regions were seeing different promos and different matches and things like that. So
so at this time, would Saturday Night's Main Event have been the only show that was telecast nationally?
Yes.
Okay.
As far as like I should correct myself. If I remember when I started watching, it was like, I want to say it was like Fox, or it was like WPIX, our local, whatever the local station was, or maybe it was even WOR, whatever it was, you would get those on Saturdays on network television. Prime time was on cable. I'm pretty sure All American Wrestling was on cable as well. But as far as like a higher
prime time was USA, right? Like it was the precursor to Raw.
Time was USA. I want to say All Star Wrestling was USA. Later in '86, we get Wrestling Challenge. That was on like Fox, because that was about the time that Fox was starting to ramp up and not just be a rerun network. And I want to say Superstars was on WOR, but this is locally for me. Like I said, it could have been different for everyone else, you know?
Right, because they were syndicated.
But as far as like nationally, like a higher quality primetime wrestling program, it was Saturday night's main event. So just to put my answer in, in context, you didn't have, well, I mean, Raw's on Netflix now, and it was always on USA or, whatever, TNN. But yeah, at the time, it was the only quality wrestling program on network television. Your opening match is Terry Funk against the Junkyard Dog. So they set this up talking about a match at an MSG house show where Terry had attacked. Actually, in a previous instance, he attacked an innocent man, and then Junkyard Dog at Madison Square Garden. And I see Derek bringing up Tuesday Night Titans. I forgot about TNT. Was actually I missed TNT. That was right before I started watching, and then by the time we got cable, that show was kaputs. So anyway, getting back to this, they had been working the houses, and this feud actually goes through like the spring of '86. So this is a long-term feud. And I put in my note, well, we'll get to that in a second. This goes about 5 minutes. Funk wins it via pinfall. So your finish is the referee is distracted by Jimmy Hart. Terry Funk hits Dog with the megaphone and then hits him with the pin. Afterwards, Terry tries to brand Junkyard Dog, but he stops it, and he eventually gets Jimmy Hart, pulls his pants down, and he brands him. So a very 80s type of heel victory, but then the baby face gets his, or the manager gets their comeuppance after the match. So I'll let you go first. What did you think?
Not much to it. I mean, and that's the story here throughout. I mean, as you go through and you look at the length of the matches, I mean, I think in the 2 episodes we're going to discuss, like the longest match might have been like 8 minutes and change, which is your average match on Raw now. Like it's pretty rare that you get many matches under 8 minutes these days. So I mean, this might have been, pound for pound, I guess, one of the better wrestling matches of these 2 shows, but that like the bar isn't particularly high. I mean, it was entertaining for what it was. I mean, I got a kick out of the finish and the pants thing at the end, which crowd was super hot for it. They were into it.
Yeah. Yep. And the megaphone with Jimmy Hart, that was a thing. That was a thing that would constantly happen. I think it happened a lot with the Honky Tonk Man when he would manage him later on as the Intercontinental Champion. The thing about this is like it's kind of I know this obviously, like I said, this predates your watching, but Terry Funk, he could do a lot more. I mean, this is a guy that was a champion, in Jim Crockett Promotions. He was feuding with Ric Flair. I mean, his match with Flair at the Great American Bash, I think it was 1989, is regarded as one of the the best matches in the promotion in their history, really. So it's kind of a truncated version, and we can go so far as to say the same for the Junkyard Dog. I mean, I don't know if you got to see the bio on him on A&E. That was one of the bios I watched. I mean, he was a big star in Mid-South.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 guys. These are 2. The best thing I could say about this match is this is a match with 2 guys with much bigger careers outside the WWF purview.
Yeah.
And this is probably also a match that probably is a TV feud now, on SmackDown or Raw. I mean, could you see this fitting on one of those shows at this point?
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's not it's hard to compare it to something that we see today. But I think immediately of like Carmelo Hayes and Andrade, who just they went back and forth forever on SmackDown last year, like something akin to that. Yeah, you just have two really strong, solid wrestlers who that you're going to put out there. They're gonna give you exactly what you want them to give you, and you can trust them to do that. And I think that's kind of what you're looking at here.
And yeah, it's this is not, I mean, it does end up being on a pay-per-view. They do work WrestleMania 2. It's Junkyard Dog and Tito Santana against Terry Funk and Haas Funk, Dory Funk. So I mean, it does make pay-per-view, but it's a tag match. But yeah, I agree with you.
And nothing on that show was particularly memorable either.
No, it is not. Yeah, and I have to watch for Susan St. James's commentary, but it's because it's been a while. But I heard she says a couple of things that are really bizarre. All right, nothing to. I mean, I got a couple of notes on the in-ring, but to your point, there's not much. We then go to a pie eating contest. Captain Lou Albano dressed as Julius Caesar versus King Kong Bundy dressed as Abe Lincoln. So the babyface team is Hulk Hogan dressed as Hercules, Tito Santana dressed as Zorro. You've got Hillbilly Jim, Uncle Elmer, and Cousin Luke as the Three Musketeers. On the heel side, I mentioned Bundy, Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov are Batman and Robin. Bobby Heenan's Davy Crockett, and Randy Savage, a recently signed Randy Savage. He wasn't with the company that long, and Elizabeth as Tarzan and Jungle Jane. And boy, do I have a note about Elizabeth a little bit later on. If anybody cares, Captain Lou won this pie eating contest.
I have nothing to say about the pie eating contest itself. It was a pie eating contest. I'm not sure how necessary it was on a pro wrestling show, but it was there. I was struck most by the fact that I was watching a pie eating contest involving the two main eventers of WrestleMania 2 just months prior to their showdown, and I was trying to think of like, what if in October of 23 on the Halloween edition of SmackDown, Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns were on opposite sides of a pie eating contest?
Well,
it's Vince McMahon.
In 1985, you had pie eating contests. In 2014, you had trick or street fights. So pick your poison.
Yeah. But at least those street fights typically weren't with main event guys. It was usually reserved for the undercard. Yes. Like, if I'm going to do these pie eating contests, like, I'm keeping Hulk Hogan out of it in the 80s. Yeah. Sorry, but
yeah. No, it's and that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. It's pretty bad that your main event opponent is involved in this, but I think, and we could probably cover all the comedy with this. Vince was not worried about the wrestling fan. See, he knew the wrestling
never
fan
has been.
Yeah, well, he knew the wrestling fan was going to watch the show. They're going to watch, pal. Yeah. He's worried about getting other people to watch the show. And that's, I mean, he did have, you can't take away that there was some success. I mean, he made the product relatable, because I think over the years, more casual fans were going to watch the WWF, WWE. It's hard to get a casual fan to sit down and watch AEW because they're not catering to that kind of audience. Mm-hmm. It's putting out a wrestling product, but WWE has always been a little bit more relatable. And that's not me saying it's better than, you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to get people to sit down and watch New Japan. You're not going to get people to watch TNA. So that's what Vince was going for. He was going, oh, look at that, a pie eating contest. Oh, the wrestlers, they're human. Oh, look at that.
The funny thing is with that is I completely agree with the premise.
Yeah.
But I don't think that Vince was ever actually good at producing that kind of content. I mean, in the Attitude Era, sure, because that was easy. I mean, you just, sex, violence, language, throw it on screen and it sells.
Yeah.
But outside of that, you see it here, for example. Like, I don't imagine there are many people turning on this pie eating contest, even in 85, 86, and being like, man, that's really cool.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this wasn't cool.
Yeah.
And I think Vince always struggled with, I think his heart was in the right place trying to reach the potential casual fan. I just don't think he ever really understood what that type of viewer might want.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. We then go to Piper's Pit. This is Hillbilly Jim, Uncle Elmer, Cousin Luke. They're going to confront Roddy Piper about what happened at Uncle Elmer's wedding. So on the previous Saturday night's main event, Uncle Elmer was getting married. Roddy Piper came out. Make a long story short, he said, "You stink. You stink. The whole wedding stinks. Everybody stinks," in typical Roddy form. And only Roddy could pull that off. Only Roddy could do it. They get into a conversation. Roddy Piper wants to know what happened on the wedding night. Elmer says it's none of your business. Piper then throws Jesse He kind of throws Jesse Ventura under the bus in a way, because he goes, Jesse Ventura made comments. So then Ventura comes out, or Hillbilly calls him out, I should say. And then all six men are talking. And actually, I should say five men, because Bob Orton sneaks up from behind. And they do this high school, where Bob Orton kneels down behind him and they push Cousin Luke over. I don't even know what to call that, but anyway, I just call it a high school prank. And then a brawl breaks out. My notes on this: if this happened on Raw or SmackDown today, out of the break, you'd see a 6-man tag.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I doubt it, Brandon, but anything to take from this Piper's Pit?
I mean, this is kind of an overarching sentiment, but I just really appreciate Jesse Ventura in this role. I always have. He is so committed to justifying the actions of the heel at any expense, and he will take the logic as far as he possibly can to do it. He'll go to the ends of the earth to do it. And other heel commentators have tried to replicate it since. And, he obviously, in a lot of respects, comes from the school of Bobby Heenan. I don't think anybody since that time has done it the way that Ventura was able to. I mean, you look at, there's a lot of fondness for Jerry the King Lawler, who would be, the quintessential heel commentator of my era as a kid growing up. And I just don't think he was ever at that level.
No. Best thing that Jerry Lawler ever did was call puppies. Was say puppies. That's it. I mean, other than that, I didn't hear anything else. All right. So then we get to a pumpkin dunking contest. We're just going to blow through this because there's not much to talk about. Bobby Heenan versus cousin Junior, not Cousin Luke. And Junkyard Dog is dressed there as a mummy. My note on this is at least Elizabeth looked good. It's funny because I told you I hadn't watched until 86. So Elizabeth looked her best at SummerSlam 88. When I think she pulls a skirt off to distract Ted DiBiase, and I had not seen this, and I was like, oh, okay. All right. Somewhere my wife is beating me over the head. All right. Then Mean Gene interviews King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd with Bobby Heenan. Obviously, the pumpkin dunking contest is a pre-tape because Bobby Heenan is right there in the middle of the arena, all cleaned up from dunking for pumpkins. And then Gene talks to Hulk and Andre, and I like this. All right, say what you want about Hogan. He turns around and says, "Enough of the nonsense." I think Hulk Hogan was saying, "All right, enough of this crap with this pumpkin." Although I don't know about that now that I think about it, because if that was a pre-tape, he probably wasn't watching it. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. It might have
It's
just lined up.
it might have just lined up. It was just it lined up
Happy
so perfect.
accident.
Yeah. And then Andre the Giant says that's enough talking. They barely, which was fine. I mean, it was short and sweet, and it got to the point. Yeah. So, all right, and then we get to Hogan and Andre versus Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy. So this was set up on the previous Saturday night's main event where Andre and Tony Atlas beat Studd and Bundy via DQ. Hogan did a run-in after the match, and then they announced it at the end of Saturday night's main event, episode 2. A little under 8 minutes, so a real marathon. Hogan and Andre win this via DQ. So Andre, he was doing a spot that he liked to do. He was tied up in the ropes, and Studd and Bundy were double teaming him. And when the ref couldn't get the illegal man out, which was Bundy, they were DQ'd. And I got to say, you know what? They were not following the rules. The referee called for a disqualification. So there was a little bit of logic in that. Yeah. So what'd you think?
Made sense. It was uneventful, especially with, I don't know how long, I can't, what was the amount of time between the second and third episode? Do you remember?
The second episode, actually, it was a month.
Okay. So, it's kind of akin to going with a non-finish on pay-per-view, which I dislike quite a bit. And this is certainly an uneventful non-finish. So I can, judging by today's standards, I would certainly be a little upset. But
yeah,
I think, to the point that you raised earlier, like, this is short of pay-per-views, which are still few and far between. This is really the only opportunity you have to see wrestlers of any merit or consequence face each other. So it's still a big deal, even though you're not getting any sort of, satisfying conclusion.
Todd Martin talked about this. I don't know if it was a mailbag or a fix episode about a year ago, but he talked about the shit finishes. And you could get it was funny because he says you could get away with it back in the day. And I was blown away at first. I'm like, wait a minute, you're seeing so little wrestling matches that you shouldn't get away with it back in the day. But when he explained it, it made sense. You're not getting, to your point, wrestlers of merit wrestling each other all the time. Mm-hmm. So you're just basically happy to see two people wrestle that matter. Yeah. Instead of seeing, Junkyard Dog against Iron Mike Sharp, who was actually somebody of consequence, but just name your jobber. And yes, Azan, you get, well, not necessarily on the house shows, because if you look at the history of the house shows, there's a lot of DQs, there's a lot of countouts. So not necessarily true. We'll talk about that with Tito Santana in a couple of minutes. But that was the whole point, was you're getting these people wrestling each other. And by doing the DQ, you're keeping the feud going. You get, Hogan, you get Andre showing some personality after the match, yelling, "I want more." I mean, that's probably the most personality I ever saw Andre show. And the same thing with Hogan. And that's not me advocating for this. Obviously it's, much more satisfying to get finishes, but I think that applies more today, especially with the fact that, Raw and SmackDown, you get matches advertised Actually, I'll give you a better example. We just did this International Championship series on AEW, right? And I'm watching this last night. So we're recording this on Thursday, February 27th. So it's the night after Dynamite. And I'm watching the Orange Cassidy versus Takeshita match. And I'm watching this and I'm saying, are we getting a non-finish and we getting a freaking triple threat match? It just smelled it a mile away. And they went with a finish, and I'm like, you know what? Good for you. You advertised an international series, which was a little weird, but you know what? You deliver to finish, you deliver to finish, you deliver to finish, and now we're getting a match at the pay-per-view. I like it. And that's the thing today is you get matches advertised. Matches are advertised. These matches weren't really advertised. I mean, they were set up, but it's not like you weren't watching, all-star wrestling or superstars of wrestling saying this Saturday on Saturday night's main event. Maybe people in the chat, and I'll throw this out to, do you guys, anybody in the chat remember on the syndicated shows advertisements for Saturday night's main event? Because I certainly don't. And that's to your point that you mentioned earlier, that the shows are not really connected. Like you could watch Saturday night's main event and basically be caught up on what's going on in the WWF.
Right.
So, all right. I don't think Amazon, you could bring that up. Yep. They did not talk about it. So, to watch Saturday night's main event, you know what, Brandon, you know what you used to have to do? On Sunday morning, we get the paper delivered. The first thing I would do on Sunday morning, I get the paper, pull out the TV guide that got included. I flip to Saturday. Oh, no, Saturday night's main event. Okay, next week. That was it. There was no advertisement. There was no next week. So, All right. I could go on, and I do that sometimes, and I apologize. Let's go to Mean Gene interviews Randy Savage. Why a woman manager? I put in my notes. Oh boy.
Yeah.
I'm like, Brandon's gonna love this one.
I thought that was interesting. We've never seen it before.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted you to do this, because I'm like, if I had you watch these shows, I'm like, it's gonna be jarring, but that's the point, because I wanted somebody that wasn't watching in this time period.
Yeah.
It's an outsider's point of view. Yes, Elizabeth, why she got involved with wrestling. And I'm like, oh my God, Gene, what are you doing? Let's see. The thing that would grind my gears when they do the non-finish is that the match ends and the ring announcer doesn't announce anything. It does not matter. So I think we see a lot of that more in today's wrestling, CJ. Back in those time periods, you would hear, the winner of this bout as a result of a disqualification, whoever. So, I do see that. And Wade used to lament about that a lot.
Commentary, you could tell in these shows too, because there were quite a few non-finishes, and I thought commentary did a much better job than they would do in the modern product, lamenting about the fact that the heel had, because in most instances the non-finish is occurring because the heel has done something dastardly, and there would be some admonishment from commentary about that, versus so frequently now it's just like, well, we've got to move on to the next thing.
Yeah. All right. Elizabeth says she's always had an interest in sports and wanted to help Randy. Well, that's good, because you should help your husband. And that's why she picked wrestling. We then go to the Intercontinental Championship. Tito Santana, who is your champion at the time, and boy, you wouldn't know it by watching the TV, because he doesn't even get a TV introduction. And he's a pre-tape, so they can put on what they want. So this was actually a harbinger of things to come, because in a few months, Savage would actually beat Tito for the Intercontinental Championship. It was actually one of the first title changes I witnessed. And it was actually the unofficial start, for anybody in the chat that might remember this, it was the unofficial start of the Danny Davis story, the crooked referee, because he was the ref and he didn't see Savage hit Tito with the foreign object. And that's what got him the Intercontinental title. So this would continue on the house circuit, and I didn't see any of the matches, but I'm told by people that sought them out that they had really good matches on the house circuit. And Brandon, I don't know how much of Tito you've gone back and watched. You say you haven't really watched much wrestling before you started watching, but Tito was a guy that no matter what you gave him, he did well. Like the Intercontinental title had to be vacated in 1990 after the Ultimate Warrior beat Hulk Hogan. So they did a tournament, and the finals was Tito Santana against Mr. Perfect, and they had a great match. Okay. I haven't seen it in a while, but I remember it being great. No matter what you asked Tito to do, he did it. And this might knock people off their socks, but if you think about it, Tito is a taller version without the mask of Rey Mysterio, because that's what Rey does anything you want. He works anybody you want. He works whatever level you want. You can main event him. You can tag team him. You could do, and that was Tito. And yeah, I mean, just pick some random matches. I mean, even this, like, I actually think this is the best. This is the best match on the show, despite it only getting 4 minutes. And it only got 4 minutes of TV time. Okay. And I think, they cut out a lot because of the time allotment they were given. They were only given an hour and a half in the Saturday Night Live spot. So they had to truncate a lot of these matches. So I'm pretty sure a lot of this stuff got cut out. But this one actually didn't. I mean, this one didn't go to commercial break. But who knows? Who knows if some of it got sliced out? Anyway, it goes to a double count out. And Savage was going to attempt a pile driver on the outside, but he didn't get it off, and they were just brawling. But I thought they accomplished a lot in 4 minutes. What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, it stood out in the sense that you have obviously two really good workers here. I mean, Santana is not a guy who I can go back and, just name you a bunch of his feuds and matches, but he's someone who, in going back and watching these major shows, is always someone who, to me, stood out as seeming exceptionally polished for that era. In a time where you'd have a lot of guys who were just doing, the most basic of the basics, guys who just didn't really bump a whole lot. There's just not a lot of movement. He was someone who you could get something out of that felt like it had some rewatchability, something that you could put on and find some enjoyment out of without having the hindsight or the memory of the angle that was attached to it, because I've always been someone who I can watch great wrestling all day, but for it to move me in any particular way, I've got to be sold on the story. And so it's really got to stand out to me if I'm not familiar with the story being told. And for Santana to have stuck out over the course of watching a lot of those shows certainly says something. I probably would have ranked this as my favorite of the two shows as well, if not for the non-finish. That's the only reason that I erred on the side of not going in that direction, because there was just so many non-finishes on these shows.
Well, if you bring up Derek's comment there, Tito Santana was one of the better IC champions, like Don Morocco and Greg Valentine. Now, one thing I will counter to that, Santana was the kind of champion that would win matches via countout or disqualification. They weren't exactly highly invested in Santana, so it was always about protecting the opponent. And I think there was some of that here with Savage, because Savage was a guy, as we would find out in the subsequent year, he not only wins the Intercontinental title, but he holds it for over a year. Mm-hmm. So in hindsight now, it felt like Santana was a transitional IC champion. But again, matches are very good. The feud with Valentine, the feud with Greg Valentine is one of the best. WrestleMania 8, he serves as the opponent for Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels' first WrestleMania singles win is against Tito Santana. So I think that was supposed to be Marty Jannetty, but he got fired. And that's a whole nother story and another podcast for another time. All right. Oh, and one thing I did want to say, I wish that this got a little more time, but unfortunately, you have to do pie eating contests and pumpkin duck. So
there's only so much time for wrestling on a wrestling.
There's so much time for wrestling. That's a Yeah, and he didn't get a TV, and he didn't get a TV entrance either, which really shows you what they. I mean, he's only the Intercontinental Champion, so and he
And
didn't
if you
have.
thought it was going to get better, that maybe they're just focusing on the comedy stuff because it's a holiday episode. Have I got a surprise for you in episode 4?
Oh boy, oh boy, yep. All right. So then we go to Mr. Fuji doing some weird like head noogie to get rid of his match, to get ready for his match with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Steamboat is chopping boards. Then we go to a segment. I promise I'll talk about this in 30 seconds. Rowdy Roddy Piper is at his rented American home. He tries to give kids bowling balls, but he calls them candied apples and bricks that are dressed like chocolate bars because, hey, they're in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So, ha. He breaks all the kids' bags with the bowling balls, but then they end up giving him chocolate-covered red hot peppers. This is where I have in my notes, well, we could have had a trick or street fight. And Roddy, I'm telling you right now, I'll die on this vine. Roddy would have been a guy to have that match.
Yeah, I mean, think of like the backlot brawl with Goldust.
Yeah,
he could do any of that stuff.
Yep. Or actually, you know who would have had the match? JYD and Funk. They would have had a trick or street fight.
Yeah.
All right. We don't want to talk about that too much longer. Hulk Hogan talks to Vicious Vince, because you would call him Vicious Vince once in a while. Let me tell you about Vince there, Terry. Who's happy that there's Hulkamaniacs out there talking about the kids giving Piper hot peppers. Gene then talks to Mr. Fuji, who breaks 2 bricks and a board. And then he talks to Steamboat, and they go back to so the upcoming match is tied to an angle where the Magnificent Morocco and Mr. Fuji was choking Ricky Steamboat with a strap. So the roles kind of reversed here. Mr. Fuji was the manager of Magnificent Morocco. He was retired from full-time competition. He had bounced around a lot in his wrestling time, but he had a lot of runs as a WWF tag team champion. 3 of them, 3 reigns with Toru Tanaka and 2 with Mr. Saito. One of the best videos I rented when I was a kid, and I don't know if it's on Peacock now, but the history of the tag team championship. And when I first started watching wrestling, again, to the overarching point, you didn't get the quality wrestling on TV, so you had to go out and rent stuff. And they had every title change, like going right back to the beginning of the titles in 1971, all the way up to, I think the video was made in 84. So it was when Mike Rotunda and Barry Windham had won the titles. I forgot. I should have looked it up. I forgot who they beat. But I think that was the last title change. But they just showed every title change. And like at the time, it was fun to see Mr. Fuji in the wrestling role. Tito Santana is one of those tag team champions too. He holds it with Tony Gurria. So a lot of history. If anybody wants to go check that out. This is a Kung Fu challenge between Ricky Steamboat and Mr. Fuji. So this match goes a grand total of 3 minutes. Steamboat wins it via pinfall. He drop kicks Fuji off the rope. I hated this match because he told me it was a Kung Fu match, and then we see suplexes. So where's the consequences for that? Like, it's either we got stipulations or we don't.
It's just a match.
So, yeah. I mean, it's funny. Like, if it was a match, okay, and let's say they gave it 3 or 4 or 5 minutes more on TV and cut the stupid pie eating contest, it actually wouldn't have been a bad. Fuji can work. Fuji could work. And this would have been fine.
But the pie eating contest was important for the NBC viewers.
Got to get those casuals, pal. Yeah, what'd you think?
It's a match.
Yep. That's it. That's it. And I mean, Steamboat had some good moves, though. I mean, he had some good kicks. I mean, there was the one thing I noted, Fuji, and it had been a while with the headbutt to the midsection. He would just kind of like he would just kind of like fall on the dude's stomach. I thought that was pretty cool. And then at one point, Fuji, like he grabs Steamboat like by the throat and he just like tosses him. Now, obviously, Fuji's, or Steamboat's jumping with his legs, but it's still pretty cool. So, I mean, that part of it was fine. But yeah, when you just start doing suplexes and it's supposed to be a kung fu match and there's no consequences for that, it pisses me off. And,
I mean, to the credit of really the people in this match and really across the board on this show, like for as forgettable as the wrestling was,
yeah,
crowd ate everything up. I mean, the crowd loved all of it. They got what they came to see. I mean, it was a different era with different expectations.
Yeah, and exactly. And even if you go back and if you watch episodes 1 and 2, the crowds are into everything, because you're not getting that normally, and you're on TV, so it's just I agree. Okay. We do a segment with a pumpkin pass. The teams have 60 seconds to pass the pumpkin down to each teammate. I forgot who won. I thought, here's the only thing that was important. Elizabeth and Roddy Piper are trying to exchange the pumpkin, and we get a view. So that's about it. That's about it. Let's see. Yeah, I don't really care who won the contest. Jesse says Captain Lou is a fat, sloppy pig, and he's not surprised he won the pie eating contest earlier.
Got to set up that match for episode 4.
Yeah. We come back from break. Jesse challenges the Hillbillies with Roddy as his partner. And then typical Saturday night's main event format, they go to another break and then they come back and they say goodbye. So that was always kind of annoying. All right. That was episode 3. Any other thoughts? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Oh, man.
Putting it into context.
Yeah, it's so hard because I feel like if I'm trying to insert myself into this time period, then it's probably, at the very least a mild thumbs up, if not more. But if you're just addressing it by today's standards, then I mean it's a disaster of a show. But I don't necessarily think it's fair to do that, to hold it to the standard that we're looking for today. I mean, do I think that it could be viewed as a better show if there was a little more wrestling and a little less of the hokey pie eating contests and Halloween crap? Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's things on this show that even through the lens of 1985, 1986, you could argue were counterproductive to what they were trying to do and what they were trying to sell. But I don't think that it would be fair to judge it by today's lens or standard.
I'll say this. There is no evidence, in my opinion, that any of these pie eating contests, pumpkin dunking contests, there's no evidence to me that brought in any more or any fans that would not have otherwise watched the product. I mean, they probably gave these segments more time than some of the matches. Mm-hmm. I mean, you slice all that nonsense out, give Savage and Santana like 5 minutes more, 6 minutes more. Even Steamboat and Fuji, give them another 5 minutes. I guarantee. And let's give, because you really didn't want to pin Bundy or Stud because Bundy's going to be your Mania opponent at 2. Stud, they were always kind of walking a fine line. You can give a finish to Santana and Savage. I think it's a really good show.
Somewhere, someone can probably draw a straight line between all of the comedy nonsense and the upswing of the Attitude Era, but it won't be me.
Yeah. For sure. All right, episode 4. we'll move through this pretty quickly here. So this takes place on December 19th, 1985. It is aired on January 4th of 86. It is at the USF Sundome, which is in Tampa, Florida. It is now the Yuengling Center. Brandon, do you know the significance of the Yuengling Center?
Short of knowing the name of the venue, I'm familiar with it, but not off the top of my head, no.
It was the final home of the Thunderdome in
Oh, that's
2021.
right.
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah, baby. Don't we miss that? Like a hole in the
yeah.
head. Uh,
Did
it's
you
funny.
ever did you ever for science for the experience, did you ever get on in the Thunderdome?
No, I never did. I never
I did
did.
it. I did it
You did?
for Wade actually. He asked me I think like a week or so in advance um to do the SmackDown post show with him. And I was
Okay.
like, you know what? Like, just for the heck of it, I'll sign up and see if I can get on so I can relay the experience because no one had done it on the torch at that point. And I got chosen, and it was very uneventful. I really thought that like it was going to be a different broadcast perspective, like almost, I didn't I expected that. I thought that the way that they hyped it up and the way that they worded it, that it was going to be them trying to recreate the live experience. So, like going in, I wasn't sure. Am I going to hear commentary? Like, am I gonna, how is this going to play out? It was just a straight TV broadcast, just straight up. And then with the commercial breaks and everything, and then like 10 seconds before they were coming back from commercial break, a little voice would go in your ear and say, "We're live in 10." And
Interesting.
yeah, that was it. I did get front and center by like right on the hard cam by doing the yes chant. It was actually Daniel Bryan's last episode of last WWE event
Oh,
when
wow.
I
Okay.
when I was on, um, and it was embarrassing. I did it for the experience to talk about it on the torch later, but yeah, it was a weird time. Don't miss it.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't. I did most of my post shows during the Thunderdome era, and trying to trying to do them a little more often these days with fans in the arena. Much better experience. All right, so real quick, they got a couple of opening skits. Hulk Hogan makes a protein shake in which he dumps an uncracked egg, gives it to Mean Gene, who fakes getting pumped up. My note on that is
Can't waste
idiots.
those nowadays.
um, yeah. So after that, we get Roddy Piper and Mean Gene. Or not Mean Gene, Jesse Ventura. They're surrounded by bikini-clad women, and they're spying on the hillbillies. Then we go to the arena, and Vince is talking about all the matches, and they introduce Bobby Heenan, who is going to fill in for Jesse Ventura on commentary while Jesse goes and wrestles. So he wrestles in the opening match. And then let's see, Gene interviews Roddy Piper and Bob Orton. They say the hillbillies' idea of a good time is eating pig's feet and playing the banjo. Then Jesse joins them, and then Mean Gene interviews the hillbillies. Jim says that they're professional athletes and they're defending their family honor. Anything to say about any of this stuff?
It was, I mean, short of like just the overall. This was kind of when it clicked for me. Like, oh, there's the continuity here is just straight up Saturday night's main event to Saturday night's main event. Like, there's nothing in between. I didn't miss anything. So that was interesting. But otherwise, just kind of a standard open. It did clue me into the fact that like these themed shows were going to continue, even though this wasn't a holiday episode. It was still being treated with the same, amount of comedy and sort of like deference to the location in this particular instance. Where the last one was all about the fact that it was Halloween. This one, it's not a holiday show or anything like that, but they are going to draw a lot of attention to the fact that they're in sunny Florida.
Yep. Yep. And we end up getting a water slide competition later because that's what we need. Your opening match, we'll get right to it. It is that 6-man tag that had been set up on the previous show. Hillbilly Jim, Uncle Elmer, Cousin Luke against Cowboy Bob Orton, Jesse Ventura, and Rowdy Roddy Piper. 8 minutes. It is won by Orton, Ventura, and Piper. Orton hits Cousin Luke with the legal cast, and then Piper puts him in a sleeper. The ref raises his arm 3 times and then calls for the bell. What I'll say about this match is I thought it was fine, not great, but there was a backstory and there was some emotional investment. So I did like that part of it. And I thought they worked around the shortcomings because the Hillbillies, they were not that good in the ring. They just weren't. Jesse was basically retired because of an injury. So, he didn't get a lot of time in the ring. Piper was a brawler, basically. And Orton had to be kind of lurking so he could do the spot with the cast. So I thought that, his part of the match was set up correctly. So in that sense, I thought it was pretty good. But it's also kind of sloppy, too, because there's a lot of tags. There's a lot in and out and in and out. And then there's brawling, and then they stop, and then there's brawling again, and the referee doesn't have control over the match. So, the live crowd does like it. It's one of those things, I guess the best way we could put it is good for the live crowd, but maybe not necessarily good on TV from an analytical standpoint. What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, it was a fine match. I'm with you in the sense that it was a little easier to get invested here because you had the through line from the last Saturday night's main event, so you knew exactly what the setup here was, and really the through line back all the way back to episode 2 too, if you consider the wedding and all that. So I thought it was fine. I mean, fine for what it was. You have obviously you're talking about a pretty significant disparity in star power here on the heel side. They come out on top, which makes a lot of sense because you want to put guys like that over strong, particularly Piper at the time. So yeah, I mean, fine opener and the right spot for this on the card too. I mean, you see this strategy employed in modern day wrestling too a lot, where you put some stars out there first that you have a hot issue and you're gonna have a hot crowd, and it starts you out on the right foot. So
yeah. And it's kind of funny that Jesse comes back to the commentary table. Like, you really don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
You would think that Heenan, because Heenan was already announcing, he was, he would eventually take over primetime wrestling. But they were already using him as a commentator. He had hurt his neck, so he was trying to be careful with, with being at ringside. But yeah, Jesse comes back, he relieves Bobby Heenan, and it's Vince and Jesse for the rest of the show. And of course, Heenan's got to start right in. They should wear trunks instead of those dirty Levi's. And then later on he goes, all these hillbillies look alike to me. Have you had you said you've watched all the old pay-per-views. I thought that this is not related to the show, but the Royal Rumble 92 and WrestleMania 8 is some of Heenan's best commentary work. The fighting with Gorilla Monsoon and the rooting for Ric Flair is just awesome.
I've seen both shows, but it's been so long at this point I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, I always, that's honestly like with a lot of those old shows where you don't have a ton in the way of great wrestling to really sink your teeth into. A lot of it is just listening to like the magic of the commentary team and the announcing work and all of that. And that's really a lot of the stuff that I enjoy the most when I go back and watch those shows.
Yeah.
But that era, the early 90s is probably a set of shows that I wouldn't mind jumping into again soon. A few years back, I was kind of doing a run through of all the WrestleManias in the lead up to WrestleMania. I didn't get very far because they're all just so long and I just didn't have a lot of time. And I think I got cut off like right around WrestleMania 7. So maybe I'll pick it up again and start where I left off.
Yeah. When Flair comes out, actually he starts right in at the beginning of the show. He starts right in. Reba McEntire does the national anthem, and he goes, "Boy, Tito's sister could really belt one out." What? Tito's sister or Reba McEntire? Will you stop? Just, oh, Bobby. To Derek's point here, I was looking that up. Now, according to Pro Fight DB, which I sometimes question its accuracy, this is actually Jesse's last match. And this website does show the house shows. So if you're saying that, I mean, that's a pretty specific date, March 22nd, 1986, then this might not be accurate. So that's something I could look up down the line. But nevertheless, let's see. Yeah, we get to a water slide competition between Jimmy Hart and the Junkyard Dog, because after JYD branded Jimmy on the last Saturday night's main event, they decided a water slide competition was the way to handle it. And Jesse, in his form, goes, "Oh wait, I think Junkyard Dog got a head start." And he says Jimmy was slowed down by his shoe. So that was Jesse. To your point earlier, just always justifying the action of the heels. You know, and a lot of people compare Corey Graves to him. I don't see it.
No, I don't either.
Good. I'm glad it wasn't me, because I've heard that comparison. I'm like, I don't see. I mean, I see more maybe JBL.
Yeah.
So
I'd put JBL closer to that category than.
Yeah, I don't see Jesse and Corey as a comp.
I mean, I would even go, and I'm not saying this is a great comparison, but I would put Nigel McGuinness closer than I would Corey Graves.
Yeah. That's fair. Okay, they call back to wrestling. Terry Funk is actually out there at the water slide competition. And he says he wants to be on Sports Illustrated the way Hulk Hogan was, because that was around the time that Hogan was on Sports Illustrated. They call back to a house show where Terry beats Hulk Hogan via count out, I think, because it wasn't clear. And then Hulk Hogan gets branded. So essentially that's the setup for this match. Mean Gene interviews Hulk Hogan, and then he introduces Junkyard Dog, who's heavily involved on this show. Another person like Jesse, multiple facets of the show. He says that Junkyard Dog is going to be in his corner. And then we get to that match. Hulk Hogan defending the WWF Championship against Terry Funk with Jimmy Hart in his corner. This goes 8.5 minutes. Hogan wins it via pinfall. It's a chaotic sequence at the end. Jimmy hits Hogan with the branding iron while he's trying to suplex Terry Funk near the ropes. Hogan gets his foot on the ropes in the pin attempt, and then Junkyard Dog, should have just said Junkyard Dog, grabs the iron, and then he headbutts Jimmy, and he was kind of keeping Jimmy Hart in line throughout the match. Hogan hits Funk with a clothesline, not even his leg drop. He hits him with a clothesline, and he scores the pin. Yeah. What'd you think?
I thought the match was fine. Wasn't anything of note. Hogan seemed a little bit more spry than I really remember him at any major point. I mean, he was moving around the ring really well, moving quite quick, really like creating movement at times, which is certainly not something that you would remember Hulk Hogan for. More than anything, though, like more than the quality of the match itself, I was just kind of struck by, and I don't think that this is tainted by obviously modern opinion or feelings about Hulk Hogan, but he is truly a product of his era. I mean, he is not a timeless act by any means.
Correct.
Like, Steve Austin was cool. Hulk Hogan, I can't imagine Hogan being cool to anybody but children. I mean, even during those days, he he was just, I mean, like, when I look at Hogan, I just think like, man, this guy is corny in the way that John Cena was to a lot of people in that era. I mean, he just is not a he is not the hero in the way that Steve Austin or The Rock was. There is nothing cool about Hulk Hogan, even in his heyday. Like even at the height of popularity, he's kind of a cornball.
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. All right. I was just listening to a podcast this morning about 1992 WWF and the 92 Rumble. Hulk Hogan eliminates Sid Justice, and guess who gets booed and guess who gets cheered? Okay. It ain't Hogan getting cheered, I'll tell you that much. And
especially sentiment turning in the 90s too. I mean, in the 90s, he's got to be. I mean, you're talking even less cool by that point.
Oh yeah. I don't go back and think, I don't think of Hulk Hogan as being cool. I mean, if anything, between my friends and I, we're emulating Steve Austin, we're emulating The Rock, right. Even now with Roman Reigns with the, with the number one. I mean, that's, yeah, and was it me in this match, or was he not working as babyface in peril at all? Like, it felt like he had the advantage, and it felt like Funk was just basically, he was throwing chairs, he's choking Hogan out, and Funk could do a lot more than that. We talked about that with episode 3.
Yeah, nothing like I'm trying to think, like nothing that I recall where they worked a standard. It felt more just like it was more just a showcase, just an 8-minute showcase for Hogan to defend the title against someone of value, but still just nothing of, they weren't giving Funk anything.
No, they did not. And that's, and there was a couple of comments in the chat earlier about this. That's what guys like him, guys like Harley Race, even Ronnie Garvin, guys that would come in from the outside, they would be truncated versions of them. And they're used to put others over. That's it. Mm-hmm. I mean, and Funk knew that. I mean, Terry knew coming to the WWF, he figured out, all right, I'm just going to have to work with Hogan and get my ass kicked, but that's how I'm going to make any kind of money. And I mean, it worked. I mean, they work the houses, they work this show, they work another Saturday night's main event. I mean, they do work, but nobody was going to beat the almighty Terry at this point.
I mean, there's nothing comparable in modern day wrestling either. I mean, the closest thing that you could really think of in recent time, because I mean, territories are obviously a bygone era, but I'm thinking like, Jordan Grace last year, her stint where she comes in to the Rumble basically to put women over. I mean, Stephanie Vaquer with Mercedes Moné last year in AEW, like shots like that, like one-off shots like that are really the only modern day comparison, because we don't have territories anymore.
Right. And there's no more of Roman, was kind of the reverse Hogan, for the last few years, in the sense of having a long-term champion, and defeating everybody, which, I mean, that's fine. Listen, they built him up. But it's very rare to have that type of star anymore. There's a lot more parity. People are always, I feel like nowadays people are looking at the current champion and they're saying, okay, who's next? Who's the next challenger? You see a lot of that in AEW more so, is it going to be Swerve? Is it going to be Ospreay? Is it going to be Omega? There's a lot more conversation on that end.
AEW has shown no interest in being a star-driven company. They are very much by committee. And in WWE, you've seen the shift to by committee as well, because they don't want anybody to be bigger than the brand. So I mean, the closest is like you said, is sort of Roman Reigns. But even he is, I don't think Roman is bigger than the brand by any stretch.
No, those days are over. Those days they ended. Vince didn't want that. Once Stone Cold and The Rock bailed out on him, I mean, Steve got hurt. But once The Rock bailed out, It became a very brand, and that's what it is now. It's brand driven. You're not looking to see what the card is to go to the show. You're like, oh, WWE, yeah, I'll go see it. Oh, AEW, yeah, I'm going to see that. You're going to see shows based on that, not based on individual stars. Okay. We'll motor through this here because we're coming up on 2 hours. I don't want to keep you longer than that. And I got to eat some dinner. We get to there's a post-match. Gene interviews Hogan, who says he wants more Funk. He didn't have enough. And JYD says, they don't call me Deputy Dog for nothing. So, yeah. Then they go to, they recap what had been going on with George the Animal Steel since he was abandoned by the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, episode 1 of Saturday night's main event. Gene then talks to George and Captain Lou, and this is ahead of a match with Randy Savage. Jesse then talks to Savage and Elizabeth on like a cliff overlooking a lake. Savage says, would a real man be scared of an animal? And then he throws Liz in the water. So we're at the point, and that was the thing I missed on the last show in the pumpkin passing contest. That's kind of the unofficial beginning of the Savage abusing Elizabeth, berating her. That was kind of the unofficial beginning of that. So it's kind of important to point that out. And then we get to George the Animal Steel versus Randy Savage, as I talked about. This is actually the start of a long-term story. So Steel would become smitten with Elizabeth. This leads to a match at WrestleMania 2. And ironically, this goes all the way to the following year at 3 when he helps Ricky Steamboat beat Randy Savage for the Intercontinental title. And it's kind of funny because he has since Steel is not around as much because of his full-time teaching job, he simultaneously feuds with Tito Santana in 86 over the Intercontinental title. So he's got these two feuds going on at the same time. This match goes about 4 minutes. Savage pins Steel after a double axe handle. So another match without a finisher, ending the match when Steel becomes distracted by Elizabeth. All right, I've talked enough. Your turn.
Yeah, it's a match. Fine. I mean, I always get a kick out of Steel ripping the turnbuckle apart and spraying the filling everywhere. My first memory of George the Animal Steel, I mean, aside from just like being generally aware of his existence, but I remember when I was a kid and I was still collecting wrestling figures. And they came out, I think it was still Jack Pacific at the time, came out with the first line of like the classic deluxe superstars. And they had, a Bret Hart and a Shawn Michaels from, I think, WrestleMania 12 and, just a whole line. And one of the first ones in that series was George the Animal Steel, but it was a big deal because he had real hair.
Yeah.
There was actual hair coming out of the chest of the figure. And I thought, like, simultaneously, that is really cool and also really gross.
Yeah, you could say that. I had the LJN figures. They're in the attic of my mother's house. I gotta go get them. But yeah, George Steele was one of them. George Steele was one of the guys. I had Hulk Hogan. I had Hogan, Steele, Sheik, Volkov, Savage, Piper. I think I had Bundy and Stud. I think I even had Hillbilly Jim as well. And Junkyard Dog. So
I've got a whole tub in my basement that at some point I have to go through of probably a couple hundred.
That's awesome.
From, early Attitude Era. I think I probably stopped collecting like right around WrestleMania 20.
Okay.
So got probably like 7 or 8 years worth of a lot of figures.
I forget you're a kid in the Attitude Era. So and that was a good. There were a lot of toys. There were a lot of figures coming. I mean, we still have them today, but like that, there was an acceleration at that point of figures. Like it was just the LJNs back in the day. Then I think you had like the like the thumb wrestlers or something that might have come out after that. But yeah, there was an acceleration around that time period. The one thing too, and before we move on from this match, because there's not a ton to. Oh yeah, LJN had the green tongue.
I remember seeing those.
Yep. You did get Savage pulling Elizabeth in front of George Steele as he was chasing him on the outside. So that becomes an ongoing thing with Elizabeth and Savage. So, at least, again, plays into a long-term story. There's continuity to this, and it leads to other things. And, ultimately, Savage gets his about a year and a half later. We then go to a highlight video of 1985. It's introduced by Mean Gene and Hulk Hogan, and just basically goes through all the highlights of 1985, WrestleMania, Saturday night's main event, the war to settle the score, Uncle Elmer's wedding, all the highlights throughout the year. And then we go to, and this happened, folks, a peace match. So Vince McMahon decided to co-opt the recent Geneva summit between President Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev of Russia. And because of that, we're going to have a peace match between Nikolai Volkov and Corporal Kirchner. Because that's what Reagan and Gorbachev talked about in November of 85, okay? It's supposed to be a scientific match. There's not supposed to be any rule breaking. Both sides had agreed to it, so that was the deal. Mean Gene interviews Volkov, Sheik, and Freddie Blassie before the upcoming match. And my notes are, I still don't understand Nikolai, but at least Sheik said Russia number 1, Iran number 1. So.
Cheeky baby.
It's cheeky baby. It's, yeah.
Twitter's best follow.
Oh, my God. He ruled. And especially on Football Sunday. Especially on football, and his random Hogan is an effing jabroni.
Oh, I loved it. I don't know. There is no bigger hater of Hulk Hogan than the Iron Sheik, and I love it.
He would go like, the Patriots are freaking jabronis, just like Hulk Hogan.
Bubba.
What?
You can't forget the Bubba at the end.
Yeah, Bubba. Oh, God. Corporal Kirchner says he will survive because of his military training, and he shows how to properly enter the water. So he goes on like the zip line thing and then goes into the water. So I learned something. Not really. Then the peace match. It goes a little over 4.5 minutes. Nikolai wins it via pinfall. After not doing a clean break, he drops Kirchner on the ropes and then delivers a knee drop. This match, I thought, was sloppy and stupid. All right. Either you have a stipulation or you're not. Where's the consequences for not doing the clean rope break? And that was the thing. Like, Vince just did not have the attention to detail back in it. It plays into our conversation of just being happy to get the good matches, and not really caring about what, what people are thinking. So what does Brandon think?
Yeah, it wasn't good. I mean, I was struck the most by, we look over the course of decades of pro wrestling, and there's always been a tie-in to current events, political landscapes, the whole 9 yards. And this is really the first time I can remember where WWE has really stripped itself, at least on television, in the presented television product, has stripped themselves of all politics. They are as clean as a whistle when it comes to that. Now, funny enough, they are probably more synonymous with politics outside of the presentation of their shows than they have ever been right now. But when you watch the product, it is stripped bare. Yeah. And AEW has never really involved themselves in that. So it's just a stark contrast to go back and see that and realize that you know, it wasn't that long ago where you would still see that kind of thing, where they were willing to still interject that kind of thing, and just, you know, it's been completely stripped
Yeah.
from the present day presentation.
Yeah. I can't think off the top of my head, but there are numerous examples. I mean, I even think I can't remember what was going on with Russia. I mean, there's always something going on with Russia, but in 2014, when Lana and what's his name? Dirty Dutch Mantel.
Oh, yeah.
What the hell was he? What was his character on TV?
Zeb Coulter.
Zeb Coulter. That's it. That's exactly it. When
man, I don't know where I pulled that from.
Yeah, good save. But there was a lot of back and forth, and she would always put Vladimir Putin on the screen, and even though even though he's not Russian, that's okay. Another one pretending to be Russian, because Nikolai wasn't even Russian. Actually, Nikolai was actually the same. He was Austrian, right? I think he was Austrian. Anyway, basically the same nationality as my grandfather. So, for what that's worth to anybody, but yeah, I'm just glad that that's not a part of the product as well. It shouldn't be. So, all right. There's a post-match attack with Kirshner going after Sheik and Volkov. And then after that, we move to the last match. Mean Gene interviews Magnificent Morocco and Mr. Fuji. And Fuji says, in my country, we cook dog, we boil dog, and we fry dog. So the Russians are bad. The Japanese are bad. Vince, And then Gene talks to Ricky Steamboat.
Make a whole WrestleMania out of it a few years later.
Oh, my God. Yeah. And then Gene talks to Ricky Steamboat and Junkyard Dog. Steamboat says they've done a ton to him, but they haven't defeated him. And JYD says Morocco's and Fuji's actions, he doesn't like them because they're doing it in front of kids. So, and then we get to the final match. It's Steamboat and JYD against Magnificent Morocco and Mr. Fuji. 5.5 minutes or so. Dog headbutts Fuji, and he just scores the pin. So another abrupt finish. I will say, I think as we get towards like the end of 86, 87, we get a little bit more in the way of finishers ending matches, and we don't necessarily get the abrupt finishes. Mm-hmm. You get the truncated matches for sure, but you still get a little bit better quality as time goes on. So it felt like a lot of the matches on these shows, and even 1 and 2, felt very abrupt and quick, and you were just like, okay, I wasn't, you weren't.
The move sets are very homogenous. Like there's very little variation wrestler to wrestler. You don't get a lot of like there's character and there's personality, but there isn't much personality to the wrestling itself.
Yeah. What's odd is if anybody showed personality or character and continuity with it was Fuji. I mean, just looking at and Ricky too. I mean, Ricky's always going to give you good quality, but I mean, Kirshner and Volkov, they were not good workers. Kirshner had a reputation of being stiff too. Steele's a comedy worker. You're not going to get the good Randy Savage in that match.
Right.
Hogan and Funk, we talked about that. I mean, you're not really getting what Funk could do.
They're not establishing like individual signature offense.
Yes.
It hasn't become because really like the product isn't being worked for TV. So there isn't that repetition of, oh, we've got this wrestler and he has this move set and this move needs to get over. There isn't that. It's just starting to develop at this point.
Right. Yeah. And it was It was a house show. It was still a house show promotion at this point. The idea was not, you know, what's his name? Dick Ebersol had seen the success of War to Settle the Score, okay, and the brawl to end it all a year before, and that's why he wanted Saturday night's main event. So you wonder if had that not happened, it's one of those what ifs. What would be the course? Would WWF have still tried to be a house show promotion? What would their TV landscape look like in the future? So anyway, anything on the last match you want to bring up?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay. Yeah, just as we talked about it, Brandon, before we close it out, any, overall thoughts, anything else, anything you learned from this time period, anything that you appreciate from the modern era or other times?
Well, certainly the wrestling quality, I think, has taken a pretty substantial step forward. In terms of, in-ring, that's the thing is there's a lot of great examples from this time period of good storytelling in the ring.
Right.
But I think that the athleticism has just, I mean, increased tenfold. I mean, possibly even more. We're talking about a completely different animal at this point. And I think that, you have the throwbacks in this era that do that style very well, but blend it with modern storytelling. Somebody like Gunther, for example, who does a lot of the throwback, beat downs and selling and the slow methodical pacing, but also has a lot of the flash and pomp and circumstance that you see out of, today's modern wrestlers. One thing that I kept thinking about while watching this was, obviously Vince had these proclivities for this very comedy-oriented, light-hearted, we don't take ourselves too seriously kind of programming. And it was WCW and the inception of Nitro that really forced his hand to change the trajectory of the company and how they presented their product. Yeah. And it had me just kind of thinking, like, what if, because I mean, we all know that if WCW comes along and WWF doesn't change their product, doesn't push in that edgy direction, then they're done. I mean, they go under. There's almost no question. But what if WCW just doesn't come along and WWF continues, down the same trajectory that it went?
Yeah.
Do you feel like the culture would have found? Do you feel like the product would have caught up to the culture? In other words, like, as we get into the late 90s, early 2000s, there's a hard edge to pop culture in general.
Yeah.
Do you think that Vince still would have found his way into the Attitude Era without WCW?
My understanding is that he went through the Attitude Era kicking and screaming. Like, he did not want to do it, but his hand was forced. I mean, there were some, like, when Diesel loses the WWF Championship, there's a promo that he cuts that's very real and very cool. And it's actually like the first time, like, this is what I liked about Diesel in the first place. But anyway, the point is not about Diesel. I don't know that he would have went the way he went and the lengths that they went in the Attitude Era. I don't think so. Now, what does that mean for the company long term? I don't know. And that's an excellent question. That's something to really, that's one of those what ifs.
Because I mean, if you figure, if you're programming for the 18 to 34 demo at that time, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, when the acts that they were bringing in, the stuff that they were putting on TV, your Limp Bizkits, your Kid Rocks, your Korn, the stuff that was on TRL every day after school for teenagers, if they aren't catering to that demo, and they're still doing like the new generation, family friendly, aw shucks kind of stuff. I mean, you're not going to have 13, 14, 15-year olds being like, oh, I'm going to watch wrestling. They're going to
Yeah.
think it's stupid.
Yeah. I mean, there was some like, Bret Hart was getting edgier in 96.
Mm-hmm.
Stone Cold Steve Austin. You had Brian Pillman. They were cheering Psycho Sid over Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series 96. So there was a
And that's that shift in teenage culture too at the time.
right. So it was getting a little cooler at that point, but if there's no WCW to push them, I don't know. I don't think so. I really don't know. Yeah. So
before we get too far away from it, I did have CJ LaChapelle in the chat asked a couple of times earlier in the show, and I didn't want to ignore. I didn't want to ignore it, but it just didn't make sense for the discussion we were having at the time. He was curious about our favorite ring announcers, either from this period or others. His was he had mentioned Justin Roberts. Some other people in the chat were chiming in too.
Yeah, I mean, I always default to the Fink, but I mean, that's more sentimental for me. I watched some early WCW. I think it was Gary Michael Capetta at that point, and his ring announcing was kind of endearing to me. But I don't really have any attachments to ring announcers,
Yeah.
You?
I would probably say I'm partial to Fink, but I think that's nostalgia for me too. I mean, not that he was around all the time when I first started watching, but he was still the guy doing the big shows. And I that always, when I think of a match, like when I think of a match being announced in my head, I hear the Fink. Like that's who's in my head. But modern day, like I think Lillian is good. I've always thought that she did a really good professional job. I mean, I was a pretty big fan of Samantha Irvin, and it took me a little while to get there, but I thought she really grew into that role over time.
Yeah.
Justin Roberts is good. He's better other times than others, I think, but I don't know. There aren't a ton of others that like really, really stand out to me.
I'd have to go back and watch like World Class and AWA and Memphis and things like that to really get it. Because, when I guess he's asking who our favorite ring announcer is. So that's a fair question. I mean, I don't like to do who's the best of all time. Well,
sure. Yeah.
I haven't watched all eras, so it's hard to know, but we'll end it on that note. Brandon, before we sign off, go ahead and plug your social and what you do for the Torch.
Yeah, sure. So I cover WWE PLEs and AEW pay-per-views for pwtorch. You can find my reports on both the free site and the VIP side. That is alongside editor Wade Keller's reports. I typically do the alt perspective coverage, unless, of course, he's got another commitment, and then it's just me flying solo. But usually there's both of our reports, so you can get both perspectives as the show goes. I cover them live with analysis, real-time coverage and analysis, super detailed. I also host Wrestling Night in America during pay-per-view PLE week. So Wrestling Night in America used to be a weekly show here on the Torch, but now is a special edition show that I host after WWE pay-per-views and AEW or WWE PLEs and AEW pay-per-views. So I will be doing exactly that this Saturday after Elimination Chamber. You can catch me right here on the PW Torch YouTube and Twitch and Facebook and all those socials. Link will be available for VIP members as well to call in. Chat's always open as well. So that's a lot of fun. I'll do the same thing next week for AEW Revolution. So keep an eye out for that. Social media wise, I'm trying to stay off Twitter these days. So you can catch me over on Blue Sky at LeClair12. Whatever the B Sky social, that whole thing. I don't remember what it is. So yeah,
There you go. You can follow me on X, Facebook, and Instagram at Frank Peteani. That's at Frank Peteani. And just tack a 73 when you go to Blue Sky. I'm not on social media much anymore, but if you message me, I will get back to you. I want to thank everybody in the chat, Derek, Sean. I am doing well, by the way. I appreciate that. Hope you're doing well. Also, CJ, everybody that contributed. Thank you so much. Everybody that's listening afterwards as a VIP member, thank you. And Brandon, as always, a pleasure to work with you. And I hope it's not too long before we work together again, my friend.
Definitely. Thanks.
All right. And for Brandon LeClair, I am Torch contributor Frank Peteani, reminding you, when you are looking for nostalgia, you've come to the right place when we talk pro wrestling then and now.